Hi there, I'm David Wilcock, and I'm bringing you a very interesting announcement today. This video is talking about the very real possibility that in the year 2020 that secret space programs will be declassified. We have a convergence of information coming together that all is pointing in this direction. Unfortunately, one of the ways that this is happening is my former insider, Pete Peterson, did pass away. This happened in July of 2019, and it was a very sad thing for all of us. Pete Peterson was widely regarded as the most genius inventor in the history of the military-industrial complex. There are at least 50 different unique patents that he came up with on his own, many of which probably evolved into multi-billion-dollar industries within the classified world. We have all kinds of amazing stuff that he's done. I was his friend from 2009 up until his death, talking to him an average of twice a week. And I also met many other insiders through Pete Peterson who I am still in regular contact with. I originally taped video back in July to commemorate him and to basically give him what I felt to be a fitting tribute. And I also now am including in that video the last interview that Pete and I had. If you haven't followed this story, Pete Peterson claimed to be working within groups where there was extraterrestrial technology that had been back-engineered into operable devices, including anti-gravity systems, free energy systems, portal travel. This sounds crazy to someone who isn't familiar with this. However, when you get into the world of Pete Peterson and what he taught us, this is not crazy, this is very real. And over the years, I have been to, for example, the Disclosure Project led by Dr. Stephen Greer. I was there on May 10th, which was a closed executive summary briefing for members of Congress and invited VIPs, of which I was one. And that was because I had gotten onto the Art Bell show prior to that time and had been on there twice, actually, before this Disclosure Project event happened in 2001. There were 39 insiders there talking about the idea that UFOs are real, and I happened to meet almost all of them, everybody that I really wanted to target. At some point, I was able to get them alone, talk to them, introduce myself. And so those 39 insiders are just one small part of what has happened. There's a lot of people who have spoken to me over the years, in some cases exclusively. And I have a unique ability to be able to remember what people tell me on many, many different subjects. And so when enough different people say the same things and they don't know each other, and I've never publicized it online, you start to become a lot more compelled about the reality of what they're saying. So Pete Peterson was really the master. He was the best out of all the insiders I had. And beginning in 2009, he started to share all kinds of things with me about, for example, an alliance that had formed within the military, the intelligence communities, both in America and around the world, working to defeat what we now call the deep state. It's also been called the New World Order, the Illuminati, this kind of thing. Pete was getting these briefings in a SCIF room, or sensitive compartmented information facility. It was very, very secretive, and I found out that the plan had been in place since the 1950s. It does now appear to be reaching its fulfillment. The things that we're seeing with the QAnon phenomenon very precisely dovetail with what Pete was telling me since 2009. And there's been a lot of infighting going on. There's a lot of underground bases. Pete said there was over, I believe, 270, 260 of them, something like this. These bases are very large. They can hold up to 65,000 people. And they have a bullet train system called the subshuttle that interconnects them. So within this world, if you can believe everything that guys like Pete have told us, and again, many other insiders confirmed very specific details, the U.S. government and other governments do have regular diplomatic relationships with a wide variety of extraterrestrial species. They are human or human-like. So many of them do look very similar to us, if not almost identical. That's another thing we've been misled about, the idea that they're all bug-eyed grays. That is not true. And they have technology that they've been sharing with us, and we apparently have been developing advanced technology of our own. So, before I get into the Pete Peterson tribute video, which will include audio from the last time that Pete and I spoke to each other that will have groundbreaking new intel that I guarantee you've never heard before, I want to talk about some very interesting things that have happened this year that are converging very nicely with what's going on with Pete Peterson. So let's talk for a moment about Salvatore Pais. And is it possible that this man is the greatest inventor in human history? Well, let's dive into this. This is the only picture of Salvatore Pais that I've ever been able to find, and it appears that he's clearly got his hands on two fighter jets. They look like maybe F-16s or F-18s, something like that. Maybe they're even F-14s. I'm not exactly sure. But when we zoom in up close, you don't even really get a whole lot of detail on his face, as you can see there. Why am I bringing this guy up? Because in one fell swoop, he patented this. What you're seeing here is called a HAUC. That stands for HAUC, Hybrid Air Underwater Craft. That's right. They're saying in these patents that were filed and publicized this year by the U.S. Navy that they have a craft that generates anti-gravity. And they're saying that this craft flies equally well through the water and the air and space. A hybrid air underwater craft, or HAUC. And when you look at this illustration, you can clearly see that it appears to be a flying triangle. Now, he goes into a lot of detail in the patent about how this works, and it is essentially a two-hull design. There is an inner hull, and then there's an air cavity, and then there's an outer hull. Within that air cavity, they say there is argon gas, and that suggests very strongly that this craft is using technology from Kenneth Shoulders, something that Pete Peterson talked to me about at great length. Kenneth Shoulders described charge clusters, or EVOs, exotic vacuum objects, very tiny areas of force that have an unusually large amount of energy, much higher than is supposed to be possible within such a small space. These charge clusters can repel gravity, and they also have enormous amounts of energy, and they are formed by directing a high-intensity electrostatic charge down a needle to a tip of a point. And if you do that within an argon gas, then what you end up getting is a much higher likelihood for these charge clusters to form. So within this two-hull ship design, you have that hollow cavity where you can form your charge clusters, and then you simply direct where they need to go. So this is an operational anti-gravity machine, and it obviously is very similar looking to what we've heard about with the infamous TR-3B flying black triangle, or other code names for it that you might have heard, like Black Manta, this kind of thing. The idea here is we're not talking theoretical speculation anymore. We're talking about an actual patent filed by Salvatore Pais with the U.S. Navy. And as we're going to see here, the story gets very interesting. On August 2nd, 2019, the Chief Technology Officer for the United States Navy, Dr. James Sheehy, confirmed that the HAUC is an operable device. Now, that is a very important distinction. This is Dr. James Sheehy. Let's read now about how this came into being. This is a link from The Drive, which is a military publication, and it says, in these patent documents, the inventor Salvatore Pais, Naval Air Warfare Center Aircraft Division's patent attorney Mark O. Glutt, I bet you that was a fun name to have in high school, and the U.S. Naval Aviation Enterprises Chief Technology Officer Dr. James Sheehy all assert that these inventions are not only enabled, but operable. Now again, The Drive is a respectable mainstream media publication that dives deep into issues from the military that the regular media might not cover, but this is definitely a reputable, accredited media entity for news coming from the military. And they're saying right here that this is an operable technology. That is a very important distinction. Let's keep reading. To help me understand, this is the author of the article, what that term may mean in these contexts, I reached out to Peter Malajnek, a patent attorney, and I looked him up. There's several guys with that name, so we're not going to use a picture because I don't know who it is, which one of them. Anyway, Malajnek informed me that the terms operable or operability are not common in patent applications, but that there is little doubt that the use of the term is meant to assert to the U.S. Patent Office that these inventions actually work. Now that is phenomenal, because what we're seeing here is that the Navy has certified that what they've already patented is an operable device. And if you read these articles, they make it very clear that their principal concern is that they not be swept out from under by other countries like China, because if China were to patent this type of technology first, then the United States military would have to be paying China every time they use it. So there's an incentive. So, wait a minute, David, let's just stop. You're talking really fast, man. Just slow down. Give it to me straight. I'm going to give it to you straight. The Navy has anti-gravity. It looks like the TR-3B, and it frickin' works. They've said, they've certified in writing with the Patent Office, this is an operable technology. It is not theoretical. They already have anti-gravity. And what does that mean? That means the thing can fly underwater. It can fly through space, and if it can fly through space, then they very likely have already done this for a long time. They have bases on the moon, they have bases on Mars, and they have bases on other planets and satellites in our solar system. And that's exactly what insiders like Pete Peterson told me, and what you're going to hear him say in what now unfortunately is his deathbed interview. The last time I ever got to speak to him, about a month before he passed away from an accidental injection. That's going to become a very important part of this video that we didn't get at the time the video was taped. The death was suspicious for reasons you're going to see in this video. We didn't know whether it was a natural death or not, but he sounds fine, as you'll hear in the recording. No, we found out it was an accidental injection. I don't know if that means a gas bubble or morphine or what, but it's very, very peculiar, especially because the deaths of two other important insiders happened almost simultaneously with this. Okay, the next big piece of news that we need to look at comes from September 26th, 2019, in which the U.S. Navy patents a free energy device. And this is exactly the kind of device that you could drop into a craft like the Hawk. It's in some cases only 0.3 meters wide, which means basically 1 foot, so it's like this big. Now let's dive into that a little bit. Here is an image from this free energy device, this compact fusion reactor as they call it. Now notice that in both Figure 1 and Figure 2, you have points that are directed at a center. Now those points could very well be generating Kenneth Shoulders charge clusters or exotic vacuum objects, just what I was telling you about before. They have to direct electrical charge down through a needle point, and then they come out and they're very highly energetic. And so if you generate a whole bunch of them, you would definitely have a free energy device. That is exactly what this thing looks like it's doing. The whole epicenter of the technology is how these points are converging on a center. That's exactly what we'd expect to see with anybody developing the Kenneth Shoulders technology into an operable patent. And it can generate a terawatt for as little as 1,000 watts of input power. That is incredible, because a terawatt is 1,000 gigawatts. And let's be clear that the Palo Verde nuclear plant, which is America's biggest domestic power plant as an actual nuclear power plant in Arizona, it only generates 4 gigawatts. Even the very, very best nuclear technology that we have on aircraft carriers only does 700 gigawatts. But again, you could power a whole city off of 4 gigawatts. Now here they're saying this thing could actually do 1,000 gigawatts, a terawatt, for something as small as a basketball, and that it actually could use as little as 1,000 watts of input power. This is fantastic. And the inventor, again, is none other than Salvatore Pais. Again? Really? Salvatore Pais is like the greatest genius we've ever seen. The guy simultaneously invents free energy and anti-gravity, and he patents it, and part of the free energy device, by the way, includes him developing a room temperature superconductor. Now let me just explain what that means. Why does your computer get hot? Your computer gets hot because whether the electricity is going through copper or whether it's going through silicon inside the chip, it's hitting these molecules, and when it hits the molecules that shouldn't really be in there but they're in the way, the molecules generate heat, right? So your processor gets hot, your laptop starts making that fan noise sometimes. That's because you don't have a superconductor. If you do have a superconductor, it doesn't generate any heat at all. So this is a phenomenal breakthrough for computers. They could become much more powerful because they're not going to generate heat anymore. And it has all kinds of other applications because it has been discovered that when you run current through a superconductor, that it becomes very capable of levitation. So you can do levitation with a magnetic field and then a superconductor if you have, like, for example, you cool it down and you can get this thing that you've cooled in dry ice and you spin it around. It's going to be a great anti-gravity demonstration. I've actually done that in a science lab for the History Channel show Ancient Aliens, which I'm a regular on. So we're here for Ancient Aliens doing a demonstration of quantum superconducting levitation. And what we have here is superconducting ceramic discs that are actually going in, they're moving over neodymium magnets, and they've been cooled with liquid nitrogen that he had right here. And so you're actually seeing a very interesting and amazing levitation effect. So James, could you just, I know you're holding the camera, could you tell us your name and your website and everything?
Yeah, my name is James Lincoln, and my website is physicsvideos.com. And if you want to email me, it's james@physicsvideos.com. And this product comes from quantumlevitation.com.
It goes right over your finger, as you can see right there. We've had a lot of fun doing this demonstration today. It is truly a remarkable thing to see and to get it all going out there like this. We've had a lot of fun doing this today. And that show is now running all day Friday and all day Saturday on History Channel, which is really amazing. I don't know if there's any other show on TV that's doing that right now, so I'm getting recognized everywhere I go. That's part of my life now, but I'm happy to be doing this video. So, Salvatore Pais, what about that name? What is this? Is there anything else going on here? I mean, I'm not denying that there could be an inventor who's enough of a genius to do something like this, because I certainly know Peterson firsthand for many years, and he invented a whole variety of things. But does the name Salvatore Pais actually mean anything else? Well, it turns out, thanks to one of our readers, that we found out that Salvatore Pais in Spanish actually means the savior of our nation. Salvatore, savior, Pais, nation. The savior of our nation. Well, wow. If there really is a guy named Salvatore Pais, he may very well have been chosen for this role of disclosing this technology. It's as if the Navy wanted us to figure this out. They left us a trail of breadcrumbs. The idea being that it will save our nation to declassify this technology, which they've already asserted through their chief technology officer is operable. Wow, that's just crazy, because with this operable technology being declassified, it would save our nation. We no longer will need fossil fuels. We no longer will need roads. We can be traveling throughout the solar system. The best versions of this technology travel so fast that you can get anywhere in North America in 90 seconds in these craft. I'm literally not kidding. 8 hours to the moon. It becomes a very manageable trip, and now a lot more things are possible. We can mine through our solar system. We can have a much greater solution for overpopulation. There's lots more places for us to migrate. And NASA has also recently been telling us that all of these different moons throughout our solar system are loaded with drinkable water. You can go look that up. I've talked about it in my latest book, The Ascension Mysteries. So it could save our nation. If we have clean energy, we don't need to pay for it anymore. That gets us off of the need for a financial system ultimately. It may not happen right away, but if you look at typical Keynesian economics, the economy is based upon capital, and capital is basically energy, or that which we need to generate things. So capital, at least energy, is one of the most important sources of capital. If you eliminate the need for paying for energy, you are freeing up incredible economic prosperity like nothing we've ever seen before. It is amazing. So Salvatore Pais, how about that? The savior of our nation. Now the next thing I want to alert you to really briefly here is that on November 11th, 2019, which incidentally is 11/11, the enigmatic QAnon posts confirmed Project Looking Glass. That also really caught my attention because I've been hearing about this going back for a long, long time. I got briefings on it from the book Alien Contact by Timothy Good. The original insider from 1989, Bob Lazar, was talking about Project Looking Glass. He saw documents on that. I had a variety of people giving me information on that, going all the way back to guys like Robert Lucian Howe in the late 1990s. He was on a Yahoo group. And I talk a lot more about that with Edge of Wonder, and there's a video coming up with them where I deep dive on that. So I'm not going to repeat all that work. They're going to be releasing the first one around Christmas, the second one around New Year's. So be on the lookout for my new Edge of Wonder video. And Project Looking Glass is apparently a technology that can see through time. And it's been something I've talked about for a long, long time. So it's very fascinating that Q has released this because many people are now aware. There's been over 500 Q proofs showing that these briefings are in fact coming directly from the current U.S. presidential administration. And so this is controversial because, of course, the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about it, but it can only go on like this for so long, and at some point we're going to get the truth. People will be very, very surprised because there's this whole effort going on to expose and arrest the deep state, including this massive number of sealed indictments, estimated by some accounts to be upwards of 140,000. And any one sealed indictment can have up to 39 co-conspirators listed in it. So this is a very big deal. This is not going to go away. You can't just expect this is going to end, and it's extremely fascinating to me. So here is the actual QAnon post. It's number 3585, where it says on November 11th, 11/11, Project Looking Glass going forward in order to look back. So very, very exciting stuff here. But this is the one that I had to get into this video and get it out to you as quickly as possible. On December 8th, 2019, we had a mind-blowing article show up where it says that secret space programs are about to be declassified, and this is not pseudoscience, it's not fringe, it's coming from, again, directly out of the U.S. Air Force this time, in a mainstream publication. Take a look. It says right here, Barrett and Rogers considered declassifying secretive space programs. Now, it doesn't say the secret space program or secret space programs, but it says secretive space programs. Basically the same word, except that secret becomes secretive with the extra IVE at the end. But it's basically the secret space program. I mean, there it is. Okay, now, let's go in and dive into this and read what it says. This is from defensenews.com. This is a totally reputable publication. You can see the link right here. The U.S. Air Force's top civilian and a key member of Congress, the top civilian of the U.S. Air Force, that's very important, and a congressional member, both agreed on Saturday that they need to declassify a large amount of information about America's military space programs to both intimidate foes, enemies, and encourage support among the public. Holy gosh. Declassifying some of what is currently held in secure vaults would be a good idea, according to Air Force Secretary Barbara Barrett during a panel at the Reagan National Defense Forum. You would have to be careful about what we declassify, but there is much more classified than what needs to be. Well, what exactly do you mean there, Barbara? Well, here's another picture of her. I mean, this is mind-blowing. She's literally the Secretary of the U.S. Air Force. Okay? Fellow panelist Representative Mike Rogers, the representative Republican from Alabama, said he met with the secretary earlier in the week to discuss that very issue and said that the information on space programs is overwhelmingly classified. Well, what do you know about that? It's right here. They need to declassify this stuff. It's overwhelmingly classified. They're talking about military space programs. People are seeing these craft. You have the USS Nimitz thing, the Tom DeLonge thing, 2004 USS Nimitz incident, and now they're saying they're going to declassify this stuff. This is real. So here is Representative Rogers, and you can see right there on his name tag, they're calling him Mr. Rogers. Well, Mr. Rogers is going to have a very good day in the neighborhood. That's all I can say about that. A beautiful day in the neighborhood. For Mr. Rogers, notice they didn't put the Mr. in there, that overclassification is one of the reasons it's been so difficult for him and others to build support both in the public and with other members of Congress for a Space Force, a sixth branch of the military under the Air Force uniquely focused on space as a war-fighting domain. Well, there you have it, the Space Force. We've been wondering, well, if it's a sixth branch of the military, and that means soldiers are going to be going there, well, how do soldiers go to space? Because supposedly all we have right now is this X-30 or X-37 craft, right? It's sort of like the space shuttle. They've decommissioned the space shuttle. We don't have any presence in space. So what's all this classified space program stuff? There's a lot that they apparently are getting ready to declassify. So this is history in the making. This is very real. And the Space Force could be telling us that they're getting ready to recruit people to fight in space, to fight wars in space. Well, this is exactly what you're going to hear Peterson talking about, that we already have bases on the moon, we already have bases on Mars, and you will actually hear him say, we are fighting the Draco. So he has confirmed in his deathbed interview the same stuff we're hearing from Corey Goode, the same stuff we heard from William Tompkins, the same stuff we've heard from other insiders as well, that there is apparently a reptilian-looking humanoid race that is very nasty. And let's go on with this now, because there's more to see. As members of the Armed Services Committee and the Defense Appropriators, we get it, but we have to have our other colleagues in the Congress be supportive of us making the changes we need and delving the financial resources that we need into this project. It's not going to happen until they understand the threat and the dependence that we have. Well, that's very, very key, because he's saying there's a threat. And he's also saying there's a dependence. We depend upon this technology to handle whatever this threat is. Okay, so again, the idea of the Draco, the idea of extraterrestrials that are negative, this might all be part of what's getting ready, and that's exactly what you're going to hear from Pete Peterson. And I don't think that can happen until we see significant declassification of what we're doing in space, what China and Russia are doing, and how space is in their day-to-day lives. Unbelievable. Once Americans have access to that currently classified data, they will throw their support behind a Space Force, he concluded. The lack of an understanding really does hurt us in doing the things we need to do in space. Well, what is the lack of understanding? What is the threat? And why would the American people fully throw their support behind the Space Force? Obviously, this is very exciting stuff. Let's keep reading. There isn't a constituency for space, even though almost everyone uses space before their first cup of coffee in the morning. Well, that's because of the internet. The two declined to say how much of the black space portfolio could move into the public, nor when these changes would start happening, but Barrett pledged that it would be a focus for her office moving forward, a sign that progress could come during the year 2020. America is the best there is in space, yet as we watch the trajectory of potential enemies, we see the relationship is changing. America is also the biggest user of space, she said. Our way of life is more dependent on space than any other nation's, and our capability in space was predominantly built at a time when we thought space was a benign environment. She's talking about trajectory of potential enemies. We used to think space was benign, that the American people will fully put their weight behind a Space Force, that there's a massive amount of stuff that's been classified that they want to declassify. And then in the very next day, on December the 9th, Benjamin Fulford, who's been an insider source I've been looking at for a long time, confirmed from his Pentagon insider that this intel is accurate. Now look at this. This is the quote from the insider now. With Boeing against the ropes, the U.S. Air Force is preparing to declassify the secret space program to shake up the military-industrial complex and generate support for a space force. Wow. With over 140,000 sealed indictments, the Department of Justice Inspector General is releasing its long-awaited report to crush the impeachment circus. So whether you agree with this idea of impeachment or not, it is very bizarre how quickly it's being shoved through. It's as if somebody has an urgent deadline, and if you've been following the work that I do, then you'll know there is a FISA report coming out, 500 pages long, apparently very damning to the deep state, and they are trying to get this impeachment done before that. What is so fascinating is that Peterson in this interview says that the key consideration is if we can make it to the year 2020 without the president being impeached, then we get declassification and disclosure. Now this is from a recording I made in June, and all of this stuff is reaching ahead now. So without further ado, I want to bring you this groundbreaking interview with Pete Peterson, which I summarized in this tribute video that I shot back in July in a beautiful location in Colorado. And I'll add one more thing, which is you might actually see the infamous Sasquatch in the forest. So be on the lookout for that. I like to have a little bit of fun with this. It's not all just so serious and somber. And I want to thank you for watching. This video is sponsored by the Wilcock Foundation, which is our 501c3. Hi there, I'm David Wilcock, and we hiked up to 10,000 feet altitude. We didn't hike the whole 10,000 feet, but it's a lot of work getting in here. And it's raining. But you know, we got to keep this show on the road. We're in a very beautiful place here. You see the mountains and the lake and the trees. And I have a very sad announcement to make. You may have already seen this in the title of the video, but Pete Peterson has died. He was my #1 insider. I met him through Project Camelot in 2009, and he became the #1 guy teaching us about the Alliance, which is this international coalition that is working to defeat what has been called the Illuminati, the New World Order, the Deep State, whatever names you want to use. Way, way, way before QAnon, which only started in October 2017. In 2009, I was getting briefings from Pete Peterson about this alliance. Just to give you a backstory, in case you didn't know who he is and why this is significant, Pete Peterson did work for the Reagan administration. He was a part of what's called Majestic, which is a lot more than 12 guys. It's not just Majestic 12. And one of the secrets is the spelling of Majestic with J refers to Her Majesty, because all this is ultimately being controlled by the British Empire. Now, what do I mean all this? Pete Peterson claimed to have worked in highly compartmentalized programs in which UFOs are commonly known to exist within the military-industrial complex.
And it sounds crazy to most people. You know, there are people out there denying your credentials, denying that you really did and said the things that you did and said. But I've met multiple insiders through you that you introduced me to who have confirmed many of the things that you've said as being true and totally real.
Well, they never did like me to talk much about it, and I never did talk much about it. And then those people have since passed away. I mean, I've been doing this since I was about 18 years old.
Right.
And interestingly enough, he was involved in a program called White Star Ranch from childhood, in which he was trained to interact with extraterrestrials directly. This is something that's been going on within the secret government since at least the 1950s. There were treaties in place, secret treaties. We don't really know how far back this stuff goes. I've heard from certain insiders that there were extraterrestrials materializing in all of the offices of the presidents of the United States going back to the Revolutionary War, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Do we have people coming up the trail? Okay, no, good.
Not at the moment. I mean, they probably won't be able to be heard.
Yeah. Ooh, we got some thunder there. So this is a guerrilla shoot. We're just doing this out in public, but it's a beautiful place. We got bugs, we got rain, we got thunder, but we're going to keep moving forward. So there were treaties in place with various extraterrestrials, and they were in the process of developing a secret space program. Now, Pete knew a lot about this. Pete worked with the actual individuals in various alphabet soup agencies that were doing this stuff. He got to meet firsthand with extraterrestrials, and they taught him how to develop anti-gravity. They didn't like working with adults. They preferred children because children didn't have this kind of mental interference of anger and stress and depression that they disliked so much. So anyway, Pete came out to the open in 2009. He had worked for the Reagan administration. He became their top advisor on classified technology. Now we're really getting some rain here.
Hail.
This is crazy. It's a little bit of hail.
The trees and then come back.
Well,
The trees will be pretty protected.
we're doing fine. I think we're, unless I really get saturated, we'll keep going. So it's sad because he died, you know, and I didn't know if we were going to get a chance to talk to him again. He had told me that he was now cleared by his allies to start talking about the 35 different, I believe it was 35, something like that, different off-plant locations. Yeah, this is crazy. We're getting dumped.
Yeah, this is crazy. We're getting dumped. This is a guerrilla shoot.
So yeah, we're getting pouring rain and hail. We're in the middle of a place where it would take us an hour and a half to hike out of here. I was hoping we wouldn't get any rain, but we are. So we got to just keep the tribute to Pete going, I guess. So the White Star Ranch thing was interesting. They brought him in as a young kid, and they started to have him intern with all these different scientists. So he would do 6 months of training and then 6 months of actual hands-on work. And he worked with a lot of different interesting people in that process. And as a result, his claim was that he had the equivalent of multiple PhDs in different disciplines. And they taught him, most importantly, they taught him all about this classified technology. A whole lot of stuff. Well, look at that. The rain is easing. That's nice. They taught him a whole lot of classified technology, a whole lot of stuff that regular folks like you and I couldn't get our hands on. And his dissertation was on something called the informational field. So one of the things that was so interesting, when we went out there in 2009 to interview with Pete for the first time with Project Camelot, he was really amazed because I was talking about something called the source field, and I was putting that book together, and I had lots and lots of information that paralleled his very nicely. And in fact, when my source field book came out, a lot of his colleagues in the DIA and other places said that they had never seen anybody nail so much of this classified science in a book before. And again, you know, people say David has no evidence, but you look at source field investigations, it's got 1,000 academic references. You look at Synchronicity Key, it's got over 700. And then the third book, I believe, is over 400. So Pete Peterson told us so much stuff. One of the things that was really intriguing was that there was apparently a facility being built around the White House for 35 different races of extraterrestrial beings that they are apparently getting ready to introduce us to at some point in the future. Okay, we got more interference, but it is now not raining, so let's just make sure they don't steal our stuff. Okay, they're just down there. Yeah, let's go back to our other shoot location now that we've lost the rain.
Well, maybe you can just pick up. You know the reason.
So Pete Peterson was part of a secret government program called White Star Ranch. And White Star Ranch was interesting because what they did is they got kids who were young and they brought them in to be trained by interesting PhDs that had access to classified science. So if you think that classified science is a recent thing, that would be incorrect. Classified science goes all the way back to guys like John Ernst Worrell Keely in the late 1800s, who demonstrated a flying platform that used tuning forks and sound. There was some type of acoustic system that he found that created anti-gravity with the combination of electrogravitics. And he navigated the craft by sound. And that all got lost. One of the great early sites on the internet about free energy was called KeelyNet, and it was a whole site dedicated to the work of John Keely. Obviously, the work of Nikola Tesla was classified. He was exiled ultimately, and after he died, they went in and they got all of his papers. So that was in the 1940s, and apparently Einstein was working on stuff that he did not make public regarding the manipulation of the space-time fabric, as he called it. And Peterson was able to be brought in as a very trained person because Pete's grandfather, I believe, was Nikola Tesla's lab assistant in Colorado. So Pete's grandfather got to learn all kinds of really cool stuff about what was really going on with science. And Tesla, of course, was way, way ahead of his time. He had wireless electricity. He had all kinds of cool things, anti-gravity. There was a Tesla anti-gravity craft where lightning bolts would come off of it and hit metal as he was flying it. So Peterson already had a really robust knowledge of science, and they brought him in and they started to train him in this White Star Ranch program. Unfortunately, he only opened up to me right near the end, right as we started to get rain, and when I was telling you this last time, he only opened up to me at the end about the fact that he had been brought to many off-planet locations, and I forget the number that he told me off the top of my head, but I believe it was more than 35.
You also told me not too long ago that you have been on, you said that you have had 60 to 65 different off-planet locations that you actually visited, and that now you're authorized to talk about it, whereas before you weren't. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. There's some things I can talk about. There are quite a few of them that I know because I'm contacting them. I'm making a radio that can contact them, and it's a whole new type of radio. It'll be a whole new type of cell phone.
And he couldn't talk about that in the past because he was under strict non-disclosure agreements with various agencies like the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, which seems to have been one of the main groups that he was working with based on various small things that he told me. So again, anybody who tries to say that Pete Peterson is a fake or a phony has not done the homework. I spent 2 hours at a time on the phone with Pete at least once a week up until he had this catastrophic injury last year where he hit his head on a toilet. He passed out in a bathroom, and when he came to, he was effectively a stroke victim who had lost his mind.
But when I had my stroke, I was passed out for 3 weeks entirely, and then for 2 months I didn't know who I was. I knew how to take care of myself in many ways. But there were a lot of things that I didn't know.
Right.
And then that all came back like just one night. Boom. They were giving me some new medicines and it brought it all back.
Right.
And they quit giving them to me and it quit coming back.
Huh.
So as a result, I couldn't remember the name of my favorite shopping store, which is Fred Meyer.
Right.
And it's taken me Took me almost a year to be able to remember that name.
Wow.
Even though I could drive to it, I could go to it and go shopping, tell you where it was located, but I could not tell you the name of that store to save my ass.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, his mind came back after, I think, like 6 months. And during that time, during those 6 months, I'd spoken to him a couple times, and he was in a delusional state of consciousness. He was saying really bizarre stuff, talking about fishes and aquariums. He was on some weird fish trip. So it's been a long road here with Pete, and the off-planet locations that he'd been to were for purposes of training. So extraterrestrials apparently were bringing the trainees out to their own planets or their own bases and their own ships. And it was a really interesting reveal when Pete finally let me know this, only after he had recovered from his stroke. And he had said that this is something he had just told me, that if this had gone down within the next 6 months, all the declass stuff that's getting ready to happen, if we could make it through the next 6 months, he was going to be able to talk about anything he wanted.
All right, well, let me get together with Uncle and see what I can and what I can't say.
Okay. That sounds good.
But I think I'm going to be able to say a lot within 6 to 8 months. I'll be able to say everything.
Really? Why 6 to 8 months?
That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. If Trump re-wins the election, I'll be able to talk about anything.
Wow. Okay.
And as much as, I mean, all this stuff that's going on Trump daily, I mean, you got all the damn shows are like half plus, positive for Trump and half negative.
Right.
All the news shows.
Right.
And the news shows have to admit that there's stuff that they had that was negative for Trump, and this Russian thing and all that stuff, all absolute bullshit.
Yep, that's true.
He spent like $400 million revamping the military base we have at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba.
Right.
Which is a military prison.
Right. Yeah, I know.
He's revamping that to put all the banksters and gangsters into prison.
Right.
And I'm telling you this right now in July 2019. So basically, what Pete was getting from his insider briefings was that by 2020, he would be able to share any information that he wanted to share. He could say anything he wanted to say. It was all going to be accessible to us. So we were really looking forward to that. They were fixing up his teeth. They were getting him ready for some kind of public debut. And he had given us so much information. He was the main insider contact teaching us about the Alliance. So let's talk about that a little bit. Pete went through all this White Star Ranch training, and he is one of very, very few people you would ever actually find. We've had LARPers try to say this, but it's very, very rare that you would actually have somebody work for the CIA and the NSA and the DIA. Nearly impossible, okay? But that did happen in Pete's case, which is one of his very unique aspects. And in the course of Pete's many different intel experiences, he got to see a lot of interesting stuff. Pete did go to Antarctica, and he went down to the mothership that was down there. Some of the best information that we have on that Antarctic mothership is from Pete. It was gigantic in size, and it had many, many other ships in it that were smaller in size. The smaller ships looked like the Vimanas that we hear about from the Hindu scriptures, and specifically, they looked like things like the stupas that you see in the Tibetan Buddhist literature. So that is an interesting thing. He talked about how the motherships had mouths on either side. We're getting interference again. I'm sorry about that. It's unavoidable. There were mouths on either side, and the smaller ships would come in, and then there were they would have little holding dishes for them, actually. And then there was like a conveyor belt. So whatever ship it was that needed to land would come on this conveyor belt, and then it would all rotate around inside. The ships were fascinating. The mothership that he saw in Antarctica was fascinating. They discovered, apparently quite by accident, that you could sing to it. You could sing to the hull of the ship. And depending on singing to it or talking to it, it would actually change form. And one of the things they discovered was that it would repair itself. So after the ship had crashed, as they started to melt off the ice, he talked about how they took these huge bags of water and then they would boil the water with very high intensity microwave beams. So they drop the bags and then they boil them on the way down, and that's how they'd melt out the ice to get into an area they wanted to get into. So they melted out this area around the ship and then they drained it out, and interestingly enough, the cracks from the ship having crashed would actually heal themselves as the ice got out of the cracks. The cracks would come together. So they found out that everybody inside the ship had their own room, and that the room had an area that was terraformed to appear like it's the outside. So you actually had grass, you had land, you had fruit trees, and then they had this artificial kind of holodeck thing that made it look like you were outdoors. So talk about AAA accommodations, you know, 5-star, 7-star hotel inside this mothership. So that was very cool. And he also was at a base down there, which he gave it kind of his own name based on the movie Ice Station Zebra. That's not really what it was called. There is a pro word for Antarctica, which I'm not going to share, because that's still one way that we can tell who really knows, who's actually been there, you know. The pro word is something that you talk about where it sounds like a normal thing, but then people on the inside are like, oh, you're talking about that. And one pro word that we have talked about is the plan. And the plan was something drawn up in the 1950s to defeat this cabal/Illuminati/deep state group that was so malevolent and destructive. So the Antarctica stories alone are quite fascinating, and I do have another insider that Pete introduced me to who also has been there and has experienced many of the same things. We heard about Antarctica from William Tompkins. We've heard about it from Emery Smith. We've heard about it from Corey Good. I heard about it from people who don't want to talk, like Bruce and Jacob. We heard about it from our old Montauk insider, Daniel. That's going now back to 2003 that I first started to talk to him, I believe. 2004 was what it was. So anyway, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and Pete Peterson brought us so much wonderful information, so many things that were so fascinating, because there has always been a war on the inside about whether to tell us the truth or not. Anybody who thinks that the government could never keep a secret, they can't even hide a file in a filing cabinet, would be wise to remember that in the case of the development of the nuclear bomb with the Manhattan Project, you had 140,000 employees, I believe it was 120 or 140,000, some number like that, depends on which source you read. Let's say 140,000. 140,000 people working on the development of the nuclear bomb, so compartmentalized that until it exploded over Hiroshima, nobody knew we had it. They had it in multiple locations at multiple military bases, and they had signs up there that said, you know, things like, what you do here, what you see here, what you say here, let it stay here. And it's like the hypnotic thing where it tells you in a rhyme, so it gets into your subconscious. Pete talked about working at the CIA and having mind-controlled shooters, lone gunmen, who were not the ones that it got pinned on necessarily, but they didn't remember doing the operation. And they would come back into the office and look at the television and see that there was this shooting tragedy that had happened, and they would actually walk in and say, oh my God, how horrible. This is such a tragedy. And everybody would remain quiet, and then as soon as the shooter left the room, they'd all start laughing. That was one of the things that led Pete to conclude that he had, quote-unquote, mud on his wheel of karma, that he wanted to come forward, he wanted to do right for humanity, and tell us what really had gone on and what he really learned. if you actually do an unbiased study of all the different insider testimonials, you will quickly see that this is not a lie. So when we have the authorized partial government disclosure going on through Tom DeLonge, through the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, in which they're focusing only on this 2004 USS Nimitz incident, where you have these tic-tac-looking UFOs that fly over the USS Nimitz. And we already know that during the initial launch, where they were trying to raise money, they had a picture of a helium balloon that was the #1 in a Mylar balloon that was made out of silver, and they portrayed that in their fundraiser as if it was a tic-tac UFO. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but it stands to reason that that could be construed as investment fraud, because they were portraying that as a picture of this UFO that they were talking about, and now you can't find the video anywhere. They scrubbed it off the internet. So they've already gotten caught in that, and they tried to raise a lot of money, but they only got $1,026,000. So when you have to put in your social security number and you have to do all this crazy stuff and submit to a background check just to invest $200 in this venture, people weren't too keen on that. So that's kind of like what we're seeing now is the restriction of free speech on the internet. We're seeing it like crazy. I wrote a whole book on this called Declass, and I highly recommend going back and reading that. It's 6 sections long, 53,000 words, 180 pages. It is a book. That would be kind of a small book, but still, it's a book. So there's so much going on right now in which YouTube as a whole has been modified as a delivery system for mainstream media content, which I guess would be good for you if you wanted to have cable, because now you don't need to pay for cable. You can get it on YouTube for free, right? They're just pushing it on us now, but there's probably still reasons to have cable as well. You know, stuff you're not going to get on YouTube. But then that's the YouTube Premium, I guess, you know. So anyway, we are being attacked. We are being shadow banned. We are having all of our links banned. It's crazy how much big tech is attacking us. But don't let this fool you. It is happening because we are winning. It is happening because disclosure is happening. And it is happening because we are getting towards the victory. In other words, Pete said that unless our president gets impeached, within 6 months he could talk about everything he knows. No restrictions. That's 2020. So there's something that was going to go on between now and the end of the year that would make it just open season for insiders. And so we all have a role to play in that process. We, as intelligent citizens, are working together to have disclosure. We want the truth. And there are some mitigating circumstances around what happened to Pete Peterson that I do feel we should talk about. So let's do that for a second, because this is valuable information that I feel does need to be shared. And it's why I hiked up 10,000 feet, you know, out to this wonderful location to give you this. So there's another insider that I've talked about before. His code name was Woody. I didn't use the code name, but now it doesn't matter because he's also dead. And so therefore, there's no need to try to save him from being killed because he was killed, okay? Now, Woody was apparently the top person in the Western world with the Western governmental apparatus, okay, and whatever forms it is, both secret and overt, who was the signatory for any deals that were done with the real financial powers behind the Asians. This is the Dragon family. Okay, so had to stand up for a while because things are starting to get sore on that rock. But I wanted to tell you guys about another interesting angle of how this whole Pete Peterson situation has played out. It's important for me to note this, that first of all, let's look to the QAnon post from July the 9th. And on that post, it says, "Gold shall destroy Fed." And that they have the gold. Now, it is very interesting to note that, and July 9th is just a few days ago as the time that we're taping right now, okay? It is very interesting to note that that information corresponds precisely with data that we got from another insider who, for the purposes of this video, we will call Ward. I've talked to you guys about Ward before. I've talked to you about the fact that there is a financial ruling group in Asia that calls themselves the Dragon family because they were the original dragon emperors of China. The Qing dynasty, which is what China is named after, Qing, that's where it comes from. And the original province is called Xi'an, Xian, which again is where this all started. There's over 120 pyramids in this Chinese area, and the terracotta soldiers were found inside one of those pyramids. They actually had to excavate and destroy the pyramid to find the entire army of the emperor that had been preserved inside. So the Dragon family apparently are extraterrestrial humans. They look Asian, but they are not from Earth. There apparently are multiple planets that have humans that look pretty much exactly like people you would see on Earth. And that's one of the many really interesting things that we're going to learn as time goes on. We've definitely heard about the people with the elongated skulls. There is a huge part of the Cabal's mythology, which they believe to be true. They have the motherships in Antarctica. They have the books from there. They have the ruins. And they believe that they are the descendants of people who crash landed in Antarctica and then developed out. The crash landing was 55,000 years ago, one of the main ones. They developed out across the Earth. They had a major catastrophe 50,000 years ago. There was another one 25,000 years ago. And then there was another one 12,500 years ago. So these are cyclical. It's a 25,000 year cycle, and it has to do with the sun giving off a huge flash of electrical and bright, fiery energy. So the geologist Robert Schoch has done some really cool work in his book Forgotten Civilization on this idea of the solar flash being what ended Atlantis. And there's a lot of really cool information about this, including this 5-inch thick layer of ash throughout most of the northern hemisphere that is all the result of this solar eruption. The solar flash apparently caused the Earth to shift on its axis, and where these people had settled, which they had called Antarctica, they called Atlantis, became Antarctica. Anyway, so that's like one group, people with elongated skulls. We've talked about this quite a bit in my other videos. The descendants of people from Atlantis that spread out, and there were two, this is another really important new piece of information. Two lines, okay? They had slightly different physiologies as well, because apparently one group may have originated on the exploded planet that has been called Tiamat or Maldek. The other group may have been originated on Mars. So anyway, there were two, this is some of the newest briefings that we've gotten. There were two surviving groups from this ancient civilization in our solar system. There were people, they both had elongated skulls, but one of them had more of a ski slope on the head, and the other one had more of a bony knot here. And you can see examples of both types of skulls, and especially in Mesoamerica, we see lots of these skulls that have been found, which is a very, very interesting study. And then in Egypt, of course, we see this same thing happening with the pharaohs, with Akhenaten, Nefertiti, their daughter Meritaten. There's several really great stone-carved heads of her in places like the Berlin Museum, where you get like undeniable. She has no hair. The skull is almost twice as long as ours, and it's just fascinating. So what we're now finding out is we don't really know if one of them was on the exploded planet, one of them was on Mars, but there were two family lines, and they were warring with each other. They might have even caused this war that blew up their planet, but warring between each other. They actually both survived. Both groups crash landed on Earth, and they eventually agreed to divide the Earth, and so one line went up through Africa, Europe, and kind of like the western part of Asia, let's say. The other group went up through the Americas and apparently to some degree pushed into Eastern Asia as well. And again, they have different skulls, and they ran the planet, and they probably had some wars. They lost contact with each other after the fall of Atlantis 12,500 years ago, the most recent solar flash, according to Robert Schoch. And in the aftermath of that catastrophe, they did not come back into contact until actually Columbus. Part of apparently why the Queen financed Columbus was to reunite these factions, because you have the people with the elongated skulls still living in the Vatican, imported from Egypt. And they used those mitre hats to conceal their identity. Most of them do not live above ground, though. They live in various secure facilities underground or otherwise outside of prying public eyes. We really know a lot less about the surviving priesthoods in Mesoamerica, where they went. They also had the elongated skulls. But we do know that they came back into contact with each other, starting with Columbus and those other marine expeditions. And eventually, this becomes the root of the Rothschild versus Rockefeller war. In other words, the Rothschilds were sort of the public face of the European faction of the people with the elongated skulls, and the Rockefellers had made treaties with the American factions of people with elongated skulls. So then you have a third party. You have this other group that also came here apart from these two warring factions, and that's the Dragon family. They arrived far more recently. They had really cool technology, and they figured out the best place to come and land to be able to get the gold. So one of the things we've heard for so long is that the Dragon family has 14.5 Olympic swimming pools worth of gold at least, whereas the official gold on the books is only 1 Olympic-sized swimming pool. So that gets pretty amazing to think about, like, wow, where is all this gold and how much wealth is that? It's staggering. And this gets into things like the collateral accounts, money that has been hidden away in various underground bases and so forth. My poor wife is getting eaten alive over there. We are really fighting hard to get you this information in this nice spot. So anyway, the Dragon family also has obviously their own underground facilities where they're manufacturing craft, UFOs. They're doing really cool stuff with that. And so when you start talking about the Dragon family, you're talking about the dynastic Asian bloodlines that have a lot more money than anybody else, including the Cabal, really. They're much more wealthy than the Cabal. And there's been this war between the Dragon family and the Cabal. It's gone on for quite some time. It never really has resolved. It's still ongoing. So anyway, the real battle to resolve our planet is going to come down to an agreement that has to be made between the Cabal, the Deep State, whatever you want to call it, and this Dragon family. They have to come out with some kind of an agreement, and the Dragon family wants us to have full disclosure, full access to the technology. They want prosperity for everybody. They want to clean up the planet. They want to get us into space. All these amazing things. That's the Dragon family's goal, okay? And they are working very hard on that goal, including circumventing all of the classified programs to bring us a hover car. That you will have a hover car in your garage, and that at its maximum speed, you're looking at being able to go anywhere in America in 90 seconds and anywhere in the world in 7 to 9 minutes. That's how fast these things go. So that is being worked on right now. I know this for an absolute fact, that this is all being put together in the works.
What happened was I was having dinner at a restaurant here in Boise where I had been having some meetings with people that are in the business of building flying saucers.
Okay.
For all intents and purposes. They're aircraft. But 22 years ago, they built 3,500 of them. 2,500 of them were sent to Mars, and 1,500 of them were put on the backside of the moon. And they are spacecraft. They travel at Mach 17.
Yeah, we've talked about this. Okay. I know who these people are. Yep.
Right. And you know the fellow that did that.
Yep. We're good friends thanks to you, so...
Yes. Well, here's what happened. When I when I was having this meal with a group of people that I had been working with on there's a new flying saucer, not flying, well, we don't call it a flying saucer, it's a new craft.
Right.
It's not a normal craft.
Right.
And it flies at about Mach 44. And it's coming out to replace one that was 23 years old now. And it was so far advanced there wasn't anything necessary. Now,
so Mach 44 means 44,000 miles an hour? What does it actually mean?
well, Mach 44 is 560 miles an hour times 44.
Oh, okay.
The one we did before, I flew once from a air base. I think it may be Davis-Monthan Air Base. I'm not sure if that's the right one or not, but anyway, it's down in the basin between San Francisco and Sacramento. And it's in a hole in the ground that's about 1.5 miles in diameter. And it's built down under the ground, and they take off out of there. They have a cloaking device that's good enough that you can't see them with your naked eye from, say, 1,000 feet.
Right.
And you don't have the number of rods and cones required to see them at that distance. And anyway, they take off from there. That's one of their bases that they take off from. It's right in the middle of, bean fields, basically.
Right.
It's at the end of the San Francisco Bay that comes in and goes all the way down to, down south of, it goes down to east of San Jose, almost, if not all the way east of San Jose. It comes under the big bridge there in San Francisco. San Francisco Bay Bridge. And then on the west side of it is Stanford University and all those little towns run down through there, Cupertino and et cetera, et cetera. And then on the other side of the bay is Hayward and Walnut Grove and Berkeley and so forth on the other side of the bay. And it's on the Berkeley side. It's between Berkeley and Sacramento. Out in an area that's, a lot of it is marshy fields, and the rest of it is up out of the water. Up out of the low water table. And but it's a hole in the ground that they just went around and around and around and shoved dirt out of it for years. And then built.
Why would they need to have this ship? Why would they need to have this ship so far down in a hole?
So people couldn't see it.
Right. Okay. And are you saying that there were bases that these ships were going to on the Mars and the Moon?
Well, they went from there. They also flew from here. Some of them went to Wright-Patterson. Some of them went to the air base there in the military base there in the Bay in Washington, D.C. A lot of them were runners that went up and up. Most of them, when they take off, they fly straight in the air. They go straight up.
Okay.
And so anyway, a lot of them went up and provided communication links. And
So why would you need to send ships to Mars or to the moon? What was the purpose of sending them out there?
purpose of it was to fight the Dracos.
Really?
They're from a different galaxy than we are. They're not from the galaxy that we're members of the Milky Way. And the people in that galaxy have a group, and most of them are people that have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth, a nose, a couple of holes to breathe through. Some of them are very different than we are, but they have the same features,
Right.
just different. Like most fish have the same things, most snakes have the same thing, rodents, most spiders, spiders have 8 legs instead of 6, and or 4, but they're still, they have 2 eyes and 1 mouth and 1 rectum, and so they're all pretty much the same, different sizes by far.
Mhm.
But anyway, as you get further out, obviously you get older than the people here in this galaxy, which is a fairly new galaxy.
Okay.
And so it's in the early stages of evolution compared to some of the others, and some of them are, the people are mechanical. They're biomechanical rather than just biological, which is an area that MIT especially has a group that have been working on building people that are biomechanical. They have computers for brains, which we don't talk about at all.
Right.
And the Dracos are basically, Draco meaning dragon. They're basically, you would say they're of a dragon family rather than a human family. Some have 6 legs, some have 4, or some have 2 legs and 2 arms. But most of them have 4 arms and 2 legs, or 4 legs and 2 arms.
Do they walk? Do they walk like a beast, or do they walk upright?
They walk both ways.
I'd never heard about Dracos with 6 limbs before. That's interesting.
Well, they're a best kept secret. They haven't been talked about much. But when you go to a meeting where they're being represented by members of the Galactic Association, where you find, that the ones that are the furthest off are the ones I appreciate the most. Their ancestors are about 6.5 feet tall, and they're praying mantises.
Right.
And their eyes are on the end of stalks. They have a head like a hammerhead shark in a way. Their eyes are on the end of stalks that stick out where their ears would normally come out.
Right.
They have multiple plates in their mouth instead of teeth, and they speak through a couple of organs that are about where our kidneys are, and they vent air through a series of vents in the back, in their back, and they can tighten and loosen the bands, these flat bands that cover those, and they can sound exactly like a human.
Really? There's no problem with the way the voice sounds?
Well, it sounds a little funny, and it comes from their back instead of their front, but
Right.
it gets pretty loud.
Huh. Do you think there are steps being made now that we're going to be introduced to these people at some point fairly soon?
I think so.
Right.
I think if Trump stays in, we may get a chance to hear about them.
Do you still get any briefings?
I haven't had any new briefings, let's put it that way. I mean, I've had briefings about old people and stuff like that, and then on these new ships that I'm building, I am building controls that are usable by us and by different other peoples that are members of our galactic association.
Right.
And they're building 3,500, and then they're building another, like about 2,250 that will go out to the moon.
So what is so amazing is that there is a particular place in America where the Dragon family representatives have been coming out at various times to meet and discuss the formation of a new financial system. And this, I've heard about various meetings through this insider that we're calling Ward. I've never spoken to Ward directly. I only spoke to him through another insider, okay? Ward had a meeting which culminated on July 9th, in which the Dragon family and the representatives of the Western establishment have now signed off on that financial agreement that will give us gold-backed currency, that will get us our freedom back, that will get us classified technology, all these wonderful things. That agreement was signed on July the 9th. A day and a half after Ward signed that agreement, he was found face down dead in his house. And he had promised me that he was going to talk to me if the time became right after the agreement was ratified and it became publicly known. I have seen pictures of Ward with the Dragon family. I am not going to share those pictures, not even with the faces blocked out, because I don't know what kind of compromising information could be in there that I wouldn't even know about. But Ward died on the same day that Pete died, Pete Peterson, and that, to me, is very suspect. I don't know if Pete was knocked off. It is strange that when I talked to him last, which was only a couple weeks ago, about this whole idea that I had stolen his money from the fundraiser, and I have recordings of him saying that's not true, that he did receive all of the money, which his take of it was $55,000, then GoFundMe got the rest.
So let's just, for the sake of this silly thing, let's just talk more about the money. So the money, you can confirm again, the money did go into your account.
Well, I don't know that it did or not, but I do know that about $55,000 did.
Well, that was the entirety of the fundraiser minus the cut that GoFundMe took. So yes, that is the full amount.
People who are making this stuff up out of no evidence, they're doing it just because they like trolling, they like attacking us, and they think this is a game. People are dying. You know, we were threatened very severely with actual terrorism at the Contact in the Desert event. I was concerned every time I went on stage. I couldn't turn my back on the audience. We had a massive security presence. They were unarmed, but we had armed guards that were on call, ready to come into the room from local police. And so if people think that this is all a joke and that nobody's dying and nobody's getting hurt, look at what just happened to Pete and look at what happened to Ward on the same exact day, folks. And then what's interesting also is, we should also talk about this, that the arrest of Uncle Jeffy, let's call him that, because we don't want to say certain words or else this video will never be seen. But if you think about Uncle Jeffy, you know what I'm talking about. Uncle Jeffy has an island that goes on that island that we don't like, okay? So we'll leave it at that. And you know what I'm talking about because he was very publicly arrested last Saturday as the time that we're doing this video, which is exactly 1 week ago. Now what's interesting is that for the 2 days before Uncle Jeffy was arrested, we had first on Independence Day itself, a massive earthquake right underneath the China Lake base, which nobody even knows about. It's almost as big as Area 51. BLM cordons off the whole thing. You can't go in there. There's nowhere you can go. But the whole thing is this really elaborate UFO base. It's got all kinds of stuff underground. It's got all kinds of stuff above ground. If you look at it, you got Edwards Air Force Base below, you got China Lake, and then you got Nellis right over here. And they're all in that big area where nobody gets to go. The BLM will tell you, oh, well, it's true. I mean, 85% of all the above ground weapons testing is done in this area. So they tell you, well, if you go in there, you're going to get blown up, turn around. So nobody knows about China Lake. Well, isn't it interesting that we have an earthquake on Independence Day, of all things, that makes China Lake non-functional as a base? And then another one happens the next day, July 5th, that's even bigger. And I was lying down in bed meditating at 8:19 p.m. For some reason, I was inspired to go to bed, get on my bed, lie down, close my eyes. I heard this dog going crazy outside in the neighborhood, shrieking like coyotes were, like a pack of coyotes. It was the weirdest dog thing I've ever heard. The dog finally stopped. I laid down. Not even 5 minutes goes by, and I hear this very loud pulse, this very loud roar. Sounded almost like a bowling ball going down a bowling lane, but like 1,000 miles an hour underground. It went woof. And then right as the sound impact came to my house, the paintings on my walls hit the wall. And that's how I knew I wasn't just getting some meditative experience. This was totally real. And then only a few seconds later, the whole room starts shaking up and down. It was very vivid, very scary. Plus, I was in the upstairs of my house, and the upstairs already shakes a lot just from the wind. So when you get an earthquake in that room, it's really, really rough. So that scared the bejesus out of me. That's part of why I came back to Colorado, honestly. If there's going to be any more earthquakes, I'd rather not be there while they're happening. And we got some deals that we're working on that are about to come to fruition, but I'm out here to finish my book. Got 3 weeks to do that. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. The point is, those two quakes completely destroyed the mission capability of China Lake. And I found an insider that's in my latest article that I highly recommend. Go to divinecosmos.com, divinecosmos.com. That's my website. And click on the article called It Begins. I want you to read D-Class too, but definitely read It Begins. And in that article, I'm talking about the fact that some very strange stuff has been reported by whistleblowers going on at China Lake. A provable long-term track record of chemtrail experimentation, weather modification. That was the hub of it. So my theory was, what if they had some other doomsday aerosol that they could launch in planes that would basically either create mass hysteria or everybody that has a weak immune system dies, something really horrible like that. Because if Uncle Jeffy gets arrested and you look at his dossier of who got invited to his island, it is a who's who list of all the top people in the deep state. So this is not a joke. When Jeffy gets arrested, that's the moment that the deep state is willing to throw everything in the trash, ruin the planet. Apparently they also tried to create a doomsday nuclear weapon launch from a Russian sub. The Russians in the sub disabled the weapon before it could be launched, and in so doing they all lost their lives. But it did not go into fusion, thank goodness. And we applaud and praise them for their heroic sacrifice. A lot of people are dying right now. This is the peak of the war. It's a World War III, a shadow World War III. So again, if there are chemtrail planes there, and if they did have a doomsday aerosol, this strike would stop it. Not to mention, we don't know what other kind of trafficking was going on from there. There's all kinds of reports from the original Fritz Springmeier books about the Illuminati, of extensive trafficking of humans underneath China Lake in the underground parts. I mean, it's anybody's guess all the crazy stuff that was going on there, but we do know that apparently Edwards, China Lake, and Nellis were the three main paperclip areas for the Germans that got transported here after World War II and really never lost their loyalty to their original party. So anyway, I'm hearing some storms and clouds, but we're going to keep going here. We're going to keep doing this for you because there's a lot of things I want to cover, and it is it's crazy and it's exciting, but it's scary, and then there's loss and there's pain and there's tears, and it's all kind of blending together right now. So I cannot believe that it's an accident that we see these two earthquakes that perfectly destroy China Lake, but like hardly anything else gets damaged. No civilian casualties. Maybe there's one guy they found under a pickup truck. They don't even know if it's from the earthquake or not. Even the town of Ridgecrest nearby doesn't seem to have been destroyed. But if you actually look at the news for the military for China Lake, they tell all non-essential personnel to leave, don't come back, go down to other bases, because everything mission capable has been destroyed. So there's nothing left there. The earthquakes just wiped it out. These were bigger earthquakes, the second one in particular, bigger than Northridge 1994. And you look at the pictures of what Northridge did to LA, and it was tremendous devastation. So, and you notice they're not talking about China Lake at all. There's no pictures from there. There's no pictures of damage. Nobody's talking about this. Then they get Jeffy the next day. Now tell me that's an accident. And then the next day after that, there's this flooding that takes place in Washington, D.C. And it's so bad that you can't ride the subway. It's so bad that the basement of the White House is flooding. I do not think this was the alliance. I do not think this was the president's own people. I've had insiders tell me that the underground tunnels around D.C. are 3 times bigger than D.C. itself. And so it's possible, as my wife actually got this idea, that they could have floodgates in the Potomac River, that they can just open them up and flood out these underground tunnels as a doomsday step, coordinating it with some kind of rainfall attack, okay, so that what you get is all of this evidence washed away. So then that doesn't stop anything, and the very next day we lose Ross Perot. Now this is also really sad because Corey Good and I were contacted by a family member of Ross Perot's. I'm not going to say who. He was going to come to Contact in the Desert, actually, and we were in some negotiation about that at one point, and he was just going to be visiting, but obviously it would be a big deal and people would know who he was. We have strong reason to believe that Ross Perot had a lot to do with the bankrolling of earlier parts of the Alliance's effort in the 1990s and onward. That a lot of his money was going in, and that without him the Alliance effort could never have happened, okay? And we also had an offer for him to finance Above Majestic, and after he made that offer, he suddenly got sick, and he was no longer mentally capable of carrying through with the offer. So I find it very suspect that you have the China Lake earthquakes that destroy nothing else but these bases. You have Uncle Jeffy gets arrested the next day. It's all starting to unravel now. Who did he invite? What are the pictures they found in his Manhattan apartment when they smashed the doors open? What other kinds of documents did they find? What did they get out of his safe? What are they going to find on the island? What kind of crazy blackmail stuff did he have on people? How many sealed indictments are there? They unsealed an indictment, folks. They unsealed an indictment about Uncle Jeffy. A sealed federal indictment. This is happening. This is true. This is real, okay? So think about what the implications are here. Think about how we are being shown the fulfillment of everything we've been telling you was going to happen. You got people messing around with kids. You got this horrible stuff going on. There's linkages to all these other things, and it's all going to unfold very rapidly because, as I told you guys, apparently there's a hard deadline of September, mid-September, for all of these things, all these different things to be declassified. And then, as I told you, Pete had told me maybe a couple months ago that if we made it 6 more months without some major problem, that he would be able to talk about anything that he had ever seen. No restrictions. So we have Ross Perot, who had offered to help us, and then, you know, he'd also helped the Alliance to a great degree, and he's lost. And then the financial agreement goes through, I think the July 9th was like a Wednesday or something like that. I forget exactly what day of the week it was, but it was July 9th. And then Ward signs off on the new agreement for the new financial system that will free the planet. A day and a half later, they find him dead, face down, in his apartment, and Pete Peterson dies the same day. And so all 3 of these guys, Ross Perot, Ward, and Pete Peterson, are heroes. They deserve our respect. And it's very sad for me to have lost Pete. I considered him like a father. My father fought in Vietnam, had a very negative view of the military, as did a lot of people with the Woodstock and the hippie movement. And Pete talked about being around soldiers as if it was like being around angels. He really loved the military, and I saw them in a different way by talking to Pete. I saw them as actually our noble and honorable protectors, that the good guys in the military did not want to support this nefarious Satanism, this crazy stuff that was going on that they were very aware of. Remember that even before 9/11 took place, there were films going on inside all these places like Bohemian Grove and the Oval Office. They have all this damning video footage, all this documented evidence, and that evidence is going to come out. So we are right on the threshold of getting the freedom that we deserve and the freedom that we've worked so hard to achieve. I honor Pete Peterson as our fallen hero. I honor Ward. I honor Ross Perot and the work that he apparently did in making this alliance happen and making it possible. It has been a very low-funded operation for a long time. The current president was not a politician. He was brought in because it was either that or they were going to do a military coup against the president of the time. And this was all decided about 3.5 years ago now, to approach him and to say, can you self-finance your own campaign? You already have a public figure presence. People know who you are. We're gonna tell you, what's really going on. He was given a 2-week briefing. He was shown all kinds of horrible stuff, and he agreed to do it. So I don't usually get too excited about presidents. I mean, I was really hoping that Obama could do some good for the country, and a lot of people got angry at me about that. And now I'm talking about the current president, and I'm saying, you know what? Maybe there's more to this than just the negative view that the media gives us. Maybe there's something else. Oh, people get so upset.
Can you talk about how Pete wasn't sick?
Yeah. So I can talk about that. So I talked to Pete like 2 weeks ago.
So Pete, I just want to confirm that today is June 6th, 2019. This is a conversation that we're having. You are not being threatened or coerced in any way. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
What's something you can do to tell us that you can confirm that it's June 6th, 2019?
Well, I can tell you that my calendar's sitting here checked off up to today, which is June the 6th.
Well, we just had give me a current event or something that's fairly current that's in the news that would confirm the date.
Well, one of the main things is that the president has just had a meeting with the Queen.
That's true.
In England. And a number of things were talked about, and he talked more sensibly than he's talked in a long time.
I got a recording of him. You can listen to it. I'm going to release it when I get back. I'm here for 3 weeks to finish my book. But Pete sounded fine. I mean, he said there was no pain. He did not appear to have any degenerative conditions. They were tweaking his dentures to get him to fit right. He was happy about that. We had discussed coming out and taping him to talk about all this new stuff that he wanted to disclose.
Well, let me just ask you this. How would you feel about us coming out there at some point fairly soon and getting some tapings done? Do you think that would be possible?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Do you think that the hospital staff there would be cooperative, that they'd let us do that?
Oh, yeah.
Like
they wouldn't have anything to do with it. We'd go do them somewhere else.
Right. So rather than doing like a private room at that facility, we would probably just want to take you somewhere else, and they're not going to get in the way.
Either way, I could do it either way.
Okay.
They like me. I'm paying $7,000 a month for this.
Really?
Yeah.
He was totally excited about that. We did it over open lines. We did it on the telephone. I had talked to Ward over open lines through text communications. And both those guys end up dead on the same day. And this is the kind of stuff, this is really like the third time that we've had a cluster of deaths all at once. One of them was around the time that we lost William Tompkins. There was another one recently, Carl Wolf, the guy who was the whistleblower for Disclosure Project, where he saw photographs of ruins on the moon that were clearly not really ruins. They were active bases, actually, extraterrestrial bases. So he died by getting hit by a truck on his bicycle, and then Preston Nichols died like almost to the same day, and he's the guy that was the Montauk whistleblower. And then my whistleblower, Daniel, nearly died that day. His tongue swelled up 3 times its size, became hard as a rock, and he has almost succumbed to cancer, but thankfully he's still around. So this is a war. This is real. I try not to get too angry about people who, in their own ignorance, accuse us of making this all up or that we're just trying to make money. Anyway, this has become kind of long, but Pete Peterson was our original guy that started telling us about the Alliance in 2009, and he gave us lots of briefings about underground bases being destroyed, about military hardware not being able to start, tanks that wouldn't start, planes that wouldn't start, all this high-level interference to stop these cabal guys from doing the end of the world. And the Alliance has steered it beautifully. This is apolitical. It does not have to do with the current president. He's just happening to be somebody who is involved right now in helping an agenda that has been ongoing since the 1950s that they called the Plan, 5-inch thick binder of how to pull this thing off, which has obviously adapted quite a bit as time goes on. It's amazing because they're going to do it all fully legally. And if you go back to the infamous, as I've made it infamous now, quote 2700 from these Q posts, what you see there is that they are going to make this all public. The public is going to learn everything. So the next stage, you know, Uncle Jeffy's just the beginning. Ordinary people are going to be learning about horrible things that are going to make them very upset. It's important that we work together with each other to stay happy, to keep going to work, to keep taking care of our kids, to get out of bed, to get past the grief, because this is really going to upset people as they learn these things. Anyway, it is upsetting that we lost Pete. I am not going to be deterred. We are not stopping. We will not respond to threats and intimidation. And I want to speak to one last thing while I still have our beautiful set here. Yeah, I'm calling it a set. So see, on mine, I'm like a filmmaker, right? So anyway, I can come over this way a little more. It is also very important to point out that when all these attacks started online, talking about Pete Peterson and that I had stolen his money, which is so ridiculous. I'd given him $18,000 of my own money. I didn't even create the fundraiser. It was created by somebody calling themselves Coco Luau. And Coco Luau handed it over to me, and the amount of BS that we had to go through with GoFundMe just for me to be allowed to transfer money to Pete's bank account was crazy. There's no way that GoFundMe would have ever allowed me to transfer it to any other account but Pete's, and it took us a lot of work even to get that done. So anyway, those attacks started happening right after Pete got transferred from Genesis Center to Cascadia of Boise. And we didn't know where he went, and in fact the people at Genesis told us, we can't even tell you if he's still alive, and we can't tell you where he went. One of Pete's friends, who's the guy that called me and told me that he had died, actually was able to talk to somebody at the center and get them to admit to where Pete went. But all the attacks started after Pete was missing, presumed dead. So I'm very, very grateful that we tracked him down. He was at Cascadia. He was in the Alpine Wing. I talked to him on the phone in his room, recorded it, and got him to say that I did not steal his money, talking about, you know, him coming forward, these new disclosures he wanted to do, and in 6 months he could say anything he wanted. So I think we are on the verge of the most stunning events in human history, disclosures like we never could have imagined, and I am really, really excited about that. It's getting cold, and so we got to go. And again, Pete, I want to honor you as a soldier, as an American hero. Thank you for your service. God bless you, Pete Peterson. and we will see you on the other side. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed this film-length movie. We are very excited over here. I mean, to see all these things coming together, despite the tragic loss of Pete Peterson, it is very encouraging. The fact that this Hawk hybrid air underwater craft has been declassified and patented, that the guy who filed the patent also did free energy, and his name translates as the savior of our nation. And then on December 8th, we actually have the top civilian in the Air Force saying that they're going to declassify the secret space programs, that there's all this stuff, and that it will rally public support for the need for a space force to make us understand there's a threat. I mean, this is very, very exciting. This is what we've been hearing about. Look at the convergence between the technologies being certified as operable from the Navy, and Dr. James Sheehy, the Chief Technology Officer, saying that, and then understand how all of this is converging, and what does it mean for us? What does it mean to have a future where these technologies are real, where they work, and where we're using them in our everyday lives? It's going to be totally, totally amazing. And this fits in with the overall concept of ascension, the idea of all these ancient prophecies that have talked about a golden age, that something will happen to us on Earth that is totally fantastic, totally remarkable, transforms our civilization in ways that even now we could never even imagine. And we have done a movie about this. So apart from the 501c3 aspect, which is what this video is, it's nonprofit, it's free, we also have a for-profit project, which is The Cosmic Secret. Now this film, I'm really, really proud of it. I star in it extensively. We have a bunch of other insiders in there as well. Dr. Michael Sala, we have Jordan Sather, just a really great team. Corey Good is in the movie as well. And what you're going to see in this movie is a lot of great production value, a lot of great B-roll, very relaxing, meditative soundtrack, and a storyline about the cosmic history of our solar system and ascension. There's never been a movie like this made before about ascension. We went to #1 21 minutes after it was released. But as of today, we found out that Facebook has banned us from advertising this film for life. The only reason that they gave was just violation of their policies, but it doesn't even make any sense because we're not doing anything that hasn't already been talked about in various other forms before. This movie is essentially a recapitulation of data, but in a very nice form. So, come on. You're going to ban this movie? It's very, very bizarre. Our advertising manager says they've never seen anything like it. We're bringing the best people together. We're talking about things that we have talked about before, but it's still a work of art, very much worthy of consideration and viewing. So when they ban something, that gives you a pretty good idea of what you need to be looking at, in my opinion. So, without further ado, I bring you the movie trailer for The Cosmic Secret, and I hope you can step up and help us out. We are under attack, and your viewing of this movie does help us tremendously. So, thank you for watching, and we will see you in another video, and hopefully check out The Cosmic Secret.
Your search for truth and deeper meaning has led you here.
Everyone in the UFO community is faced with how do you navigate a course through material that encompasses ancient civilizations, extraterrestrials, secret societies, and what is the relationship between those and the governance of our modern world?
There is more to this reality than you are being told.
A good starting point is to rethink everything that we thought we knew about history.
We don't even know our own potential as human beings.
I'm a researcher.
I was an FBI special agent.
I'm a secret space program whistleblower. Because of my unprecedented access in the programs, I was able to learn about an ancient race that they refer to as the Elder race.
They are the most evolved extraterrestrial group that has ever been involved with humanity.
They take a genetic approach to help them manage this great experiment of humanity. They also bring us various belief systems.
Isn't it interesting? All of religious traditions, that Earth has an end with a catastrophic event. We have this evidence hidden out in the open, but we don't ask the deeper questions.
The CIA declassified a document that describes a cataclysmic series of events.
The main message from these ETs are for us to prepare ourselves for this coming event.
This so-called apocalypse is actually not gloom and doom. It's a rebirth. There will be a whole new beginning.
Whoa, look at that, look at that!
Insiders are telling me this will lead to some evolutionary leap in what it means to be human. One thing I will say at the end here is I am aware that Pete Peterson mentioned the number 3,500, but then, and that was the number of crafts that he said that we were sending to the moon and to Mars, but then he had the numbers 2,500 and 1,500, which of course adds up to 4,000. Now, some people would try to assert that this completely demolishes Pete's credibility, but you have to remember he did have a stroke, and little things like specific numbers become more difficult at that point. The overall narrative arc of what he's saying is consistent with what he said before he had the stroke and consistent with what other insiders have told me. So please remember that this does not discredit the overall information. But I guess there's a little wabi-sabi in there, and so people love to try to poke at one little thing and say that discredits the whole thing. But when you look at the overall evidence, you look at what's going on here, it adds up very nicely with the stories of Salvatore Pais, declassification of anti-gravity and free energy, and now the Air Force telling us that they're going to be declassifying a bunch of information on secretive space programs.